Babysitting wasn't new to me. I'd been doing it since I was 16, and by now at 23 I thought I'd seen it all. From tantrums to weird parents, nothing really fazed me anymore. That's why, when the Petersons called me last minute, I said yes without a second thought. They lived in Lakewood, Ohio, in one of those big old Victorian houses that looks like it belongs on the cover of a Halloween card. Elizabeth Peterson sounded frazzled on the phone, desperate for someone to watch their 2-year-old son, Noah, while they attended a work dinner. When I arrived, the house felt even more massive in person. It towered over the other homes on the block, its windows glowing dimly in the cold October air. Elizabeth answered the door, dressed in a sleek black dress, but with a worried expression on her face. "Thank you so much for coming," she said, ushering me inside. We usually have the same sitter, but she canceled and we didn't know what else to do. "No problem," I said, smiling to put her at ease. Noah was adorable, big brown eyes, curly hair, and a shy smile. Elizabeth showed me his room upstairs, with its soft blue walls and glow-in-the-dark stars scattered across the ceiling. She handed me an old baby monitor, the kind with a grainy screen. "It's ancient," she admitted, "but it works." Once they left, the house fell silent. Too silent. I tried to ignore the way the floor creaked under my feet and the distant sound of the wind rattling the windows. I told myself it was just an old house, nothing unusual. Noah went to bed without a fuss, and I settled into the living room, scrolling through my phone and flipping through channels. The baby monitor sat on the coffee table, its static-filled screen a faint reminder of my responsibility upstairs. About an hour later, I heard something. At first I thought it was just interference, but then I realized it was humming. Soft, slow, almost like a lullaby. I stared at the monitor, my heart pounding. The screen flickered, but it was too grainy to make out much. The humming stopped. I told myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling creeping up my spine. I went upstairs to check on Noah. His room was exactly as I'd left it, nightlight glowing, stuffed animals scattered around, and Noah sound asleep. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something I hadn't before. The window was slightly open, not enough to let in the cold air, but enough to make me uneasy. I shut it and locked it, telling myself I must have overlooked it earlier. Still, the uneasy feeling lingered as I went back downstairs. I was just starting to relax again when the house phone rang. The sharp, shrill sound made me jump. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaky. For a moment, there was silence. Then a man's voice, low and scratchy, spoke. "He's such a quiet sleeper, isn't he?" My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" I demanded, gripping the phone tighter. The line went dead. I immediately called Elizabeth, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a frantic message, trying to sound calm but failing miserably. I locked the front door, the back door, every window I could find. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The baby monitor crackled to life again. This time it wasn't humming, it was whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it was clear enough to send chills down my spine. I grabbed the monitor and ran upstairs to Noah's room. He was still asleep, his little chest rising and falling peacefully. But there was something new. A piece of paper taped to the outside of his crib. It read, "You can't protect him forever." I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to grab Noah and leave, but I couldn't. Not yet. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from above me. I hadn't even realized the house had an attic. But now, as I stood frozen in the hallway, I saw the narrow staircase leading up to a small door. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. Maybe it was just the house settling. But deep down, I knew better. Gripping the baby monitor like it could somehow protect me, I climbed the stairs. My hands were slick with sweat as I pushed open the door. The attic was cold, filled with boxes and old furniture, and in the center of the room was a single rocking chair, surrounded by a circle of toys. The chair was moving. Not a lot, just a faint, almost imperceptible sway. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The chair stopped. Before I could move, the door slammed shut behind me, and then I heard it again. "You shouldn't have come here." I stumbled down the stairs, my heart racing. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew one thing. I wasn't alone in that house. Back in the living room, I grabbed my phone and did something I should have done hours ago. I Googled the Peterson house. What I found made my stomach drop. The house had a history. Decades ago, a young boy named Jacob lived there with his family. One night, his babysitter called the parents in a panic saying Jacob had vanished. They never found him. And then there were the rumors. Neighbors claimed they saw shadows moving in the windows at night, heard whispers when no one was home. I closed my laptop and looked around the room, my pulse pounding in my ears. The house felt different now, darker, heavier, like it was alive. I decided to get Noah and leave. I didn't care if it made me look crazy, but when I went to his room, he was gone. The crib was empty, the sheets cold. The window was wide open, the curtains billowing in the night air. "Noah?" I called out, my voice breaking. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the corner of the room. It was a man, tall, with glowing red eyes and a twisted smile. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with a look that made my blood run cold. I lunged at him, but before I could reach him, the room went dark. When the lights came back on, he was gone. And so was Noah. The police came, but they didn't find anything. No sign of Noah. No sign of the man. The Petersons were devastated. A week later, I received a package in the mail. Inside was the baby monitor, its screen cracked, and a photo of Noah sitting in the rocking chair in the attic. Written across the bottom of the photo were the words, "He's mine now." Life was throwing punches left and right. Rent was overdue, my part-time job barely covered groceries, and college loans were piling up. So, when the Harpers offered me a month-long house-sitting gig in their historic Charleston mansion, I didn't think twice. Free living in a luxurious home, plus some extra cash just for taking care of their golden retriever, Max. It sounded like the jackpot I desperately needed. The Harpers were this lovely retired couple, warm, polite, and old-fashioned in the charming Southern way. Their home, though, was the real showstopper, a white columned beauty with wraparound porches and sprawling gardens. It was the kind of house that belonged in movies where every corner whispered secrets of the past. "Just feed Max, water the plants, and relax," Mrs. Harper said with a smile as they handed me the keys. Mr. Harper, however, lingered. "Oh, one thing, don't bother with the basement. We keep it locked anyway, no need to go down there." I nodded, not giving it a second thought. Basements? No thanks. I've seen enough horror movies to know better. The first few days were heaven. Max was the perfect companion, and the house felt like a sanctuary. At night, I'd sit on the porch, sipping sweet tea, watching the warm glow of the Charleston streets. Life felt calm for the first time in months. By the third night, the house started to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a stage, one where I wasn't the only actor. It started small, faint noises late at night. At first, I thought it was just the creaking of old floorboards or the wind rattling the windows. But the more I listened, the more the sounds felt deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Max noticed it too. He'd lift his head, ears perked, and stare at the hallway with unblinking focus. "Relax, buddy," I muttered, but my voice sounded unsure even to me. One morning, I found the living room rug slightly shifted and a chair out of place. Max couldn't have moved them, and I certainly hadn't. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe the house had quirks, but that night, Max started growling, low, guttural, and unrelenting. He was staring at the basement door. My stomach twisted as I walked over to check it. The door was still locked, just as Mr. Harper had left it. But something about it felt wrong, like it wasn't just a door anymore, but a boundary I wasn't meant to cross. The next morning, I woke to a sickening realization. The basement door was ajar. I knew I hadn't touched it, and Max certainly couldn't have opened it. My first instinct was to slam it shut and lock it again, but curiosity gnawed at me. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and peered down the dark stairwell. The air was damp and cold, carrying a faint metallic smell that sent a shiver down my spine. Max refused to follow me, whining softly at the top of the stairs. I ventured down cautiously, each step creaking louder than the last. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, dusty boxes, and broken tools. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, but then I noticed something out of place. A door hidden behind a stack of crates. It wasn't locked. Pushing it open revealed a narrow tunnel, its dirt walls illuminated by my trembling flashlight. At the end of the passage was a small, makeshift room. Inside was a filthy mattress, a pile of torn clothes and scattered belongings, a flashlight, a cracked mirror, and, most disturbing of all, a stack of Polaroid photos. My breath hitched as I flipped through them. They were photos of the Harpers, taken inside their home. Some were dated just a few weeks ago, and then, at the very bottom, there was a photo of me, sitting on the porch, from yesterday. Panic clawed at my chest. Whoever had been living here wasn't just some drifter, they had been watching me. I stumbled out of the room, nearly tripping over the mattress, and bolted up the stairs. My hands shook as I locked the basement door and shoved a chair under the handle. Max was barking like mad, his eyes fixed on the front window. I peeked through the curtains and froze. Across the street, barely visible in the shadows of a tree, was a man. He was tall and thin, his face partially obscured by the brim of a dirty baseball cap. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, watching. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the man was gone. They checked the basement and confirmed the tunnel led to an old storm drain system that connected to the neighborhood. Probably a squatter, one officer said, like that would somehow make me feel better. But deep down I knew this wasn't over. Over the next few nights, the tension in the house became unbearable. Every sound felt amplified. Every shadow seemed to move. Max refused to leave my side, growling at nothing. One evening I found another Polaroid. This one was taped to the outside of the living room window. It showed me sleeping in the guest room. I felt like I was losing my mind. The police didn't believe me. The Harpers were unreachable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Then, the noises started again, this time louder. Footsteps echoed through the halls at night, doors creaked open and shut, and the faint sound of whispering filled the air. It all came to a head on my final night in the house. I was packing my bags, ready to leave early and never look back, when Max started barking uncontrollably. He was standing at the basement door, which was wide open. My heart pounded as I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a fireplace poker, and descended the stairs. At the bottom, I saw him, the man from the photos. He was crouched in the corner, muttering to himself, his face pale and gaunt. "Get out!" I yelled, raising the poker. He didn't move. He just stared at me with those wide, bloodshot eyes, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "I was waiting for you," he whispered. Before I could react, he bolted past me, scrambling up the stairs and out the front door. By the time I reached the yard, he was gone. The police arrived again, and this time, they found more evidence. In the tunnel, they discovered a notebook filled with ramblings, most of it incoherent, but some pages mentioned the Harpers by name. "They don't know I'm here," one entry read, "but I'm always watching." When the Harpers returned, they were horrified. Mrs. Harper confessed that they'd suspected someone had been breaking into the house for years, but they'd never found proof. They sold the house within weeks. Even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that he's still watching. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my new apartment, I catch myself glancing at the windows, half expecting to see him there. Whoever he wasn't just a drifter. He knew the Harpers, he knew me, and he's still out there. I wasn't planning to house sit for anyone, especially not for Kate, my neighbor from across the street. But when she knocked on my door that Thursday evening, her face pale and her hands clutching a travel bag, I couldn't say no. "I need someone to watch the house for the weekend," she said, her voice shaky but polite. "Feed Oliver, water the plants. It's just for a couple of days. I'll pay you $300. Kate had always seemed nice, polite, quiet, and the type of neighbor who smiled but never lingered long enough for a conversation. Her house, however, was a different story. It stood out in our modern Seattle neighborhood, a towering Victorian home with dark weathered wood and intricate carvings that made it look like something out of a ghost story. "Sure," I said, eyeing the house through my window. "I can do that." She handed me a list of instructions, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you, Ethan. Oh, and one more thing." She hesitated, her eyes darting to her own front door. "Don't go into the basement. It's a mess, and there's no reason to go down there." Her tone shifted, becoming firmer. It caught me off guard. But $300 for a weekend? I wasn't about to question it. That night after she left, I grabbed my bag and walked across the street. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt it. The air was thick, almost damp, and carried a faint metallic scent. Oliver, her sleek black cat, sat at the top of the stairs, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. I followed Kate's instructions, fed Oliver, watered the plants, and settled on the couch. For the first hour, it was fine, peaceful even. But then, Oliver started acting strange. He hissed at the basement door, his fur standing on end. I laughed nervously, brushing it off. "It's just an old house," I muttered, more to myself than to the cat. Later that night, as I lay on the couch scrolling through my phone, I heard it. A faint thud, like something shifting below me. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. I told myself it was nothing, just the house settling. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next morning, the house felt different. Lighter, almost. I convinced myself the noises were just my imagination, fueled by a late night and too much coffee. Oliver, however, wasn't convinced. He avoided the basement door altogether, darting past it like it might reach out and grab him. Around noon, as I sat at the kitchen counter eating a sandwich, I heard it again. A faint tapping sound coming from the basement. It wasn't constant, just irregular. Tap, pause, tap, tap. I stared at the door, my appetite vanishing. Was it a plumbing issue? Maybe Kate had mice down there. Whatever it was starting to get under my skin. I shot her a text. "Hey, I keep hearing noises from the basement. Is everything okay down there?" Her response came almost instantly. "Don't worry about it, just stick to the list and don't go down there." The message felt wrong, too quick, too dismissive, but I didn't press her. That night the noises got louder, not just taps, thuds now, heavy, deliberate. I tried to focus on a movie, but every sound pulled my attention back to that door. By midnight I couldn't take it anymore. Curiosity and unease battled in my head, but curiosity won. I grabbed my phone and a flashlight, my heart pounding as I approached the basement door. As I opened it, a rush of cold air hit me, carrying that metallic smell I'd noticed before. The stairs leading down were steep and narrow, disappearing into darkness. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped down, one creaking step at a time. The basement was everything you'd expect from an old house. Damp, cluttered, and suffocatingly dark. My flashlight flickered across dusty furniture, stacks of cardboard boxes, and tools hung neatly on the walls. But there was something else, something that didn't belong. In the far corner of the room, partially obscured by a tattered sheet, was a cage. A massive one, like something you'd use to hold a large animal. My heart pounded as I approached it, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my hand. Then I saw movement inside. There was a man in the cage. He looked terrible, dirty, pale, his clothes torn and his face hollow. When our eyes met, he scrambled to the edge, gripping the bars with bony fingers. "Help me," he croaked, his voice barely audible. "Please." I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. "What? What the hell is this? Who are you?" "My name's Andrew," he said, his voice hoarse. "She locked me in here. You have to get me out before she comes back." "She? You mean Kate?" His face twisted in fear and he nodded. "She's not who you think she is. She's dangerous. Please, you have to help me." I opened my mouth to ask more, but then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the front door opening upstairs. "She's back," Andrew whispered, his eyes wide. "You have to hide. Now." My heart felt like it was about to burst. I turned off the flashlight and crouched behind a stack of boxes, barely daring to breathe. "Ethan?" Kate's voice called out, sweet and calm. "Are you here?" Her footsteps echoed above, slow and deliberate. I could hear her moving through the house, and with each step my panic grew. Andrew grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You can't let her find you down here," he whispered. "If she does, you're as good as dead." I swallowed hard and nodded, inching toward the stairs. My only thought was to get out of that house as quickly as possible. The basement door creaked open and light spilled down the stairs. Kate's silhouette appeared at the top, her shadow stretching across the walls. "Ethan," she said again, her tone sharper this time. "I told you not to go down there." I didn't answer. Instead, I bolted up the stairs, shoving past her and into the kitchen. She didn't follow, not right away. When I turned to look back, she was standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at me with a smile that chilled me to my core. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every noise, every creak of the house made my heart race. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. The next morning, Kate was gone. She left a note on the counter saying she had errands to run and would be back in the evening. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my phone and went back to the basement. Andrew was still there, his face lighting up when he saw me. "You came back," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm getting you out of here," I said, searching for the key. It didn't take long to find a rusted iron key hanging on the wall next to the cage. I unlocked the door and Andrew staggered out, his legs weak. "We have to move fast," he said. "She'll be back soon." As we climbed the stairs, Andrew stopped suddenly, his face pale. "Wait," he whispered. "Do you hear that?" The front door creaked open. Kate was back. "Ethan," Kate's voice called out, calm and cold. "What are you doing?" Andrew grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the back door, but it was too late. Kate stepped into the kitchen, a butcher knife gleaming in her hand. "You really shouldn't have done that," she said, her eyes locked on Andrew. He was better off in the cage. Andrew stepped in front of me, his fists clenched. "You're not going to hurt him." Kate's smile widened and she lunged. The two of them collided, crashing into the counter. The knife clattered to the floor, and I didn't think, I just acted. I grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy glass vase, and swung it at Kate's head. She crumpled to the floor unconscious. Andrew and I didn't stick around. We ran, out the door and into the street, not stopping until we were far from the house. I called the police as soon as we were safe. They arrived quickly, but by the time they searched the house, Kate was gone. The basement was empty too. No cage, no evidence that Andrew had ever been there. The police didn't believe me. They chalked it up to a misunderstanding, maybe even a prank. But I knew what I'd seen. Andrew disappeared a few days later. He left me a single message. "Stay safe. She won't forget you." To this day, I can't shake the feeling that Kate is still out there, watching, waiting. And sometimes late at night, I swear I hear tapping sounds in my own basement. I wish I could say I took the job because I wanted a break from the city. But honestly, I was desperate. My job in New York had gone up in flames, rent was overdue, and my savings were barely enough for a week's worth of gas and groceries. So when I saw the ad about house-sitting a historic property in Willow Creek, California, I didn't think twice. It sounded easy. Watch a house, feed a couple of plants, and pocket enough cash to stay afloat. The Green family, an older couple, was moving to Florida for the winter. They seemed nice enough over the phone, even a little too eager to hire me. Mr. Green mentioned they'd had trouble finding someone, which felt odd, but I brushed it off. Who says no to a fully paid gig with free housing? When I got there, I realized why they'd had trouble. The house wasn't just historic, it was full-on Gothic, steep roofs, twisted iron gates, and windows so old they looked like they'd seen the Civil War. The place sat in the middle of nowhere, with dense pine trees surrounding it like a wall. It was beautiful in a haunted postcard kind of way, but there was this weight to the air, like the house had too many stories to tell. Inside, it was massive. High ceilings, antique furniture, and more rooms than I could count. The Greens gave me a tour, but honestly, I zoned out halfway through. All I could think about was how weirdly specific some of their rules were. "Don't touch the door to the basement," Mrs. Green said, her voice sharp like she was scolding a child. "It stays locked." Mr. Green chimed in, forcing a laugh. "It's just storage down there, nothing exciting. But you know, house rules." I nodded, but something about the way they both avoided looking at the basement door stuck with me. Still, money's money, and I wasn't about to question it. After they left, I walked through the house alone, trying to get a feel for the place. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears strain to hear something, anything. I told myself I'd get used to it. Spoiler alert, I didn't. The first night I barely slept. It wasn't the bed. That was actually way comfier than the beat-up mattress back in my apartment. It was the silence. It felt alive, like the house was listening to me breathe. Around midnight, I heard it. Soft, faint footsteps above me. I froze, my heart pounding so loud it was all I could hear. But then I remembered, old houses creak, right? It's just the wood settling or whatever people say to convince themselves they're not about to get murdered. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned on every light in the house and checked the locks twice. All secure, no intruders, just me being paranoid. To calm down, I flipped through the channels on the old boxy TV in the living room. Static on most of them, but I eventually landed on some late-night sitcom rerun. That's when I heard it again. Steps, but this time they weren't faint. They were deliberate, heavy. They were coming from the hallway. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. No answer. Grabbing the first thing I could, an umbrella from the stand near the door, I crept toward the sound. My hands were shaking, but I had to check. When I turned the corner, the hallway was empty. The only thing there was an old rotary phone on a small table against the wall. I hadn't even noticed it before. It wasn't plugged in, but as I stared at it, the damn thing started ringing. I swear I felt my soul leave my body. My gut told me not to answer it, but my hand moved on its own, picking up the receiver. "Hello?" I whispered. At first there was nothing, just static. Then faintly I heard breathing. Slow, deep, deliberate. And then, the line went dead. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd run a marathon in my sleep. My heart was still racing from the phone call. I tried to convince myself it was just some freak glitch. Maybe the house had old wiring or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. As I went about my day, little things started to bother me. I couldn't find my car keys at first, even though I always left them on the kitchen counter. Then I noticed one of the front windows was unlocked, and I was sure I'd locked all of them the night before. That night I tried to distract myself with a book I'd found in the study. Some dusty old thing about California history. But every few minutes I felt like I needed to look over my shoulder, like there was someone just out of sight. Then, as I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, I stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting on the table was a half-full glass of water. I hadn't poured it. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at it. My hands started to sweat and my legs itched to run, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe I'd poured it earlier and forgotten. Yeah, that had to be it. But as I picked it up, something else caught my eye. Footprints. Faint, muddy footprints leading from the back door into the hallway. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I decided enough was enough. I was going to figure out what was going on in this house. First, I checked every door and window. Again. Everything was locked this time, but the footprints from the night before were still there, dried and crusted into the wood floor. They led straight to the basement door. Now, I'd promised the Greens I wouldn't touch it, but honestly, screw that. Whatever was happening in this house wasn't normal, and I wasn't about to sit around waiting for things to get worse. The basement door was old and solid with a big brass lock on it. It wasn't hard to pick. I'd learned that trick in college thanks to a roommate who kept locking me out of our dorm. The lock clicked open, and the door creaked as I pushed it. The smell hit me first. Damp, musty, and metallic, like rusted pipes and mildew. I flicked on the light switch, and a single bulb buzzed to life, casting long, eerie shadows over the staircase. The basement was packed with old junk, boxes, furniture, and what looked like decades of random storage. But as I moved further in, I noticed something odd. In the far corner of the room was a small table neatly organized with rows of knives. Hunting knives, kitchen knives, even a few that looked handmade. They were all clean, polished, and laid out like some kind of creepy collection. Then I saw the photos. Polaroids, scattered across the table, all of different people. Some were smiling, others looked terrified, but none of them seemed familiar. Underneath the photos was a notebook, filled with scrawled handwriting that was almost impossible to read, but I could make out a few phrases. The house watches. They can't leave. Protect it at all costs. I didn't get a chance to read more because I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps upstairs. I bolted out of the basement, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps upstairs weren't just creaks or my imagination this time. They were deliberate, slow, and heavy. Someone was in the house with me. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a rusted wrench from the basement floor, and crept toward the sound. Every step I took felt like it echoed through the house. As I reached the top of the basement stairs, I flicked off the light and closed the door as quietly as I could. The footsteps were now coming from the second floor, right above me. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. My voice cracked, and the silence that followed made my skin crawl. Then, the footsteps stopped. My brain screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of there and never look back, but something about the house felt like it was pulling me back in. I crept up the stairs, gripping the wrench so hard my knuckles turned white. As I reached the landing, I saw it, a shadow moving at the end of the hallway. My breath caught, and I froze. The shadow wasn't just passing by. It was standing there, watching me. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The shadow moved closer, stepping into the dim light from a flickering sconce. It was a man, filthy, with wild eyes and tangled hair. He wore layers of tattered clothes, and his hands twitched like he was itching to do something. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, his voice low and hoarse. "This house doesn't like strangers." I took a step back, my heart racing. "What are you talking about? This isn't your house." He tilted his head, a twisted smile creeping onto his face. "It's not yours either. It's mine now. I keep it safe." Before I could respond, he lunged at me, swinging something shiny, one of the knives from the basement. I barely dodged, the blade grazing my arm. Pain shot through me, but adrenaline kept me moving. I swung the wrench wildly, connecting with his shoulder. He stumbled but didn't fall. We struggled, crashing into walls and furniture. He was strong, too strong for someone who looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Somehow, I managed to shove him down the stairs. He tumbled, landing in a heap at the bottom. I didn't wait to see if he was okay. I ran to my room, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial 911. "There's someone in the house," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "He tried to kill me." The police arrived in record time. Or maybe it just felt that way because every second felt like an eternity. I unlocked the front door and practically collapsed into the arms of the first officer I saw. "He's in there," I said, pointing toward the basement stairs. The officers moved quickly, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they descended. I sat on the porch, clutching a blanket one of the deputies had handed me, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. A few minutes later, the officers emerged, dragging the man in handcuffs. He was shouting incoherently about the house, about how it needed him, and how I was ruining everything. "What the hell was he talking about?" I asked one of the officers. The cop frowned. "We've had reports about this guy before. Name's Travis. He used to work for the Greens as a handyman, but they let him go a few years back. Apparently, he didn't take it well. Looks like he's been squatting here ever since." My stomach churned. "And the basement? Did you see the knives?" The officer nodded grimly. "Yeah, we saw them. This guy's clearly disturbed. We'll look into it, but you're lucky you called when you did. Could have ended a lot worse." They left with Travis, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The house felt heavier somehow, like it was angry. The Greens returned the next day, horrified when I told them what happened. Mrs. Green kept wringing her hands, muttering about how they should have sold the house years ago. Mr. Green was quiet, his face pale as he stared at the basement door. I packed my things and left that same afternoon. As I drove away, I glanced at the house one last time. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a shadow in the upstairs window. I don't take house-sitting gigs anymore. The day Karen called me, I should have trusted my gut and said no. But when someone offers you an easy paycheck for house-sitting, and you're behind on rent, you don't ask too many questions. Karen, always the optimist, sold it as a great gig. She said it was just for a weekend. "You'll barely have to do anything, just keep an eye on Thornfield Manor. My cousin owns it, but he's out of the country. Easy money." Easy money, right? Wrong. The first warning sign should have been her tone. She wasn't her usual bubbly self when she talked about the place. Her voice dropped, almost like she didn't want anyone else to hear. "Just don't go exploring too much, okay? The house is old, and, well, you'll see." That was weird, but I brushed it off. Thornfield Manor wasn't far, just outside Asheville, tucked away in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Karen gave me the keys and directions, along with a look I couldn't quite place. Sympathy? Guilt? I figured she was just being dramatic. The house was massive, a hulking beast of wood and stone that seemed to sag under its own weight. The front yard was overgrown, and the windows were clouded with grime. The paint peeled off the siding like dead skin. But the worst part? It felt alive. Like the house was watching me as I walked up the creaky steps to the front door. Inside, it wasn't much better. The air was heavy, stale, and smelled faintly of mildew. The furniture was old, but intact, covered with dust like no one had lived there in decades. A grand staircase spiraled up to the second floor, its banister polished to a shine. That seemed odd. Karen had said no one really used the house. So who polished the wood? The first night was when things got strange. Around midnight, I was reading on the couch when I heard it. Soft footsteps upstairs. I froze, holding my breath, straining to hear. Then came the sound of something dragging across the floor like furniture being moved. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. No response. Grabbing a flashlight, I forced myself to check the upstairs. Every step on the old wooden staircase creaked loudly, echoing through the empty halls. But when I reached the second floor, it was silent. Nothing out of place. I laughed nervously to myself, trying to shake off the unease. But then, as I turned to head back downstairs, I saw it. The door to one of the bedrooms, just slightly ajar, closed on its own. Not a slam, not a gust of wind, it just gently shut. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Old houses creak, right? But as the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around noon, I decided to check out the rest of the house, mostly to distract myself. The kitchen was outdated, with avocado green cabinets and appliances straight out of the 70s. The dining room had an eerie charm, with a massive table that could seat 12, though the chairs were pushed back as if the dinner party had just ended and everyone got up at once. But it was the living room that stopped me cold. There was a massive fireplace blackened with soot, and above it hung a portrait of a family. A man, a woman, and 2 children, all dressed in Victorian-era clothes. Their faces were scratched out, gouged deep into the canvas. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint noises, the creak of floorboards, a distant laugh that sounded more like a wheeze. At one point, I thought I heard whispering right outside my door, but when I opened it, there was nothing but silence. Around 3 a.m., the banging started. It came from the basement door, loud and insistent. Bang, bang, bang. My heart nearly leapt out of my chest. I grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the noise, my feet barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. The door was locked. "Hello?" I whispered. The banging stopped. I stared at the door, hand trembling on the knob. Slowly, I unlocked it and pulled it open. The basement stairs descended into darkness, a cold draft rushing up to meet me. Shining the flashlight down, I saw nothing, just stairs and shadows. But then, at the very bottom, there was a single wet footprint. It wasn't mine. The wet footprint at the bottom of the stairs was enough to send a chill crawling up my spine. It wasn't like the rest of the floor was wet, just that one single mark, as if someone had stepped out of thin air. The logical part of me screamed to shut the door and forget it ever happened, but curiosity has a way of overriding common sense. Against all better judgment, I started down the stairs. Each creak of the steps felt deafening in the stillness. The beam of my flashlight bounced off the stone walls, revealing cobwebs and shelves cluttered with old tools and jars of God knows what. At the bottom, I froze. There were more wet footprints now, leading away from the stairs and deeper into the basement. I followed them, my heart thundering in my chest. The footprint stopped in front of a large wooden wardrobe shoved against the far wall. It looked completely out of place in the damp, musty basement, its ornate carvings and polished wood almost pristine. My flashlight flickered as I reached out to touch it, and I hesitated. Something about the air around the wardrobe felt wrong, heavy. With shaking hands, I pulled the doors open. Empty. Nothing but darkness inside. I felt a rush of relief, but it didn't last long. As I stepped back, I noticed the footprints were gone, vanished completely. That's when I heard it. A soft, wheezing laugh coming from directly behind me. I spun around, the flashlight jerking wildly, but there was nothing there. Nothing but empty space. I didn't stick around. I bolted up the stairs, slammed the basement door shut, and locked it. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave the house and never come back. But I didn't. Stupid, right? Something about the place felt like it was daring me to stay, like it wanted me to unravel whatever secrets it was hiding. The next morning, I decided to call Karen. Her voice was strained when she answered, like she already knew what I was going to say. "Has anything strange happened?" she asked, her words cautious. "Strange?" I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, you could say that. Karen, what the hell is going on with this house?" There was a pause, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "Just don't go in the basement again, okay? It's better if you don't." And then she hung up. That night I barely slept. I left all the lights on, hoping it would keep whatever was in the house at bay. But around midnight, the sounds started again. This time they were louder. Heavy footsteps echoed through the upstairs hallway, deliberate and slow, as if whoever or whatever was up there wanted me to know they were there. "Hello?" I called out, gripping the flashlight like it was a weapon. No response. I forced myself to go upstairs, my legs trembling with each step. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by the flickering bulb at the far end. One of the bedroom doors was ajar, the same one that had closed itself the first night. This time it was open wider, as if inviting me in. I stepped inside. The room was freezing, my breath visible in the air. It was sparsely furnished, a bed, a dresser, and a single chair by the window. But there was something on the bed that hadn't been there before, an old leather-bound journal. I hesitated, then picked it up. The cover was cracked and worn, and the pages inside were brittle, filled with faded handwriting. As I flipped through it, one passage caught my eye. They whisper to me at night. They say the house belongs to them now. I tried to leave, but they won't let me. They'll never let me. A loud crash from downstairs made me drop the journal. My heart nearly stopped. I sprinted down the stairs, expecting to find something broken, but everything was untouched. That's when I noticed the basement door. It was open, just a crack, but I knew I had locked it. And there on the floor were fresh, wet footprints leading away from the door. Standing there, staring at those fresh, wet footprints, I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Someone or something was in the house with me, and they wanted me to know it. I needed to call the police. No amount of money Karen promised me was worth staying another second in Thornfield Manor. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I tried to explain the situation. I think someone's in the house. I'm house sitting, but there are footprints, wet footprints, and noises coming from the basement. The dispatcher's calm voice did little to steady my nerves. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line and remain somewhere safe. Somewhere safe. Where the hell was safe in a house that seemed to breathe, to move, to play tricks on my sanity? I backed into the living room, keeping an eye on the basement door, which still hung slightly open. That's when I saw it. A shadow, impossibly tall, flickering in the corner of the room. It didn't move like a person. It rippled, like smoke caught in a draft. I blinked, and it was gone. But the cold in the room lingered, clawing at my skin. Then I heard it. The sound of something dragging upstairs. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Whatever was in the house wasn't confined to the basement anymore. The officers arrived not long after. I ran to meet them, relief flooding through me. Two uniformed men stepped inside, their flashlights slicing through the dark corners of the house. "Where did you hear the noises?" one of them asked. "Everywhere," I muttered. "But the footprints, they came from the basement?" The officers exchanged a look before heading down. I stayed rooted in the living room, my body coiled tight with fear. Minutes passed. Then from upstairs came the loudest crash yet. I screamed, the sound catching in my throat. The officers rushed back up, one of them motioning for me to stay back. "It's coming from the attic," one of them said. "The attic?" I stammered. "I haven't even been up there." We climbed the narrow stairs together. The attic door was shut tight, but something heavy banged against it from the other side. One officer pushed the door open, and the smell hit us immediately. Rot, damp wood, and something else. Sickly sweet. Inside, the attic was a nightmare. Stacks of rotting newspapers were piled against the walls. In the center of the room was a makeshift bed, surrounded by empty food cans and crumpled clothing. But it wasn't the mess that made my blood run cold. It was the writing on the walls. Words scrawled in black charcoal covered every inch of the attic. "They're watching. They know. Don't leave." And then, in huge letters above the bed, "You can't escape." "Looks like someone's been squatting up here," one officer muttered, shining his flashlight around. But that didn't explain the noises, the wet footprints, the shadow, and it definitely didn't explain the figure standing in the far corner of the attic. I blinked, certain my eyes were playing tricks on me, but it didn't move. It stood completely still, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It wasn't a person. It couldn't be. One of the officers aimed his flashlight toward it, and it vanished, leaving nothing but an empty corner. "Sir, you need to leave," the officer said firmly, his face pale. "We'll handle this." I didn't argue. I bolted from the house, leaving behind my bag, my phone charger, everything. The air outside felt lighter, but I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being followed. I sat in my car, gripping the wheel, staring at Thornfield Manor as the officers continued their search. Part of me hoped they'd find a logical explanation. The other part of me knew they wouldn't. Karen called me the next morning, her voice a mix of guilt and fear. "Are you okay?" she asked. "What the hell is wrong with that house, Karen?" I snapped. "You knew, didn't you? You knew something wasn't right." She hesitated and then quietly she said, "I didn't think it would bother you. My cousin said the house has a history, but I didn't believe it. People said it's cursed." "Cursed?" I laughed bitterly. That's one way to put it. Before I could say more, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. My heart stopped. There in the back seat was the faint outline of a figure. It wasn't solid. It shimmered, like a reflection in water. I spun around, but the seat was empty. The car was empty. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in that house wasn't done with me. I never went back to Thornfield Manor. Karen tried to pay me, but I refused. No amount of money was worth what I'd seen or what I'd felt. To this day, I still wake up in the middle of the night, hearing those same soft, wheezing laughs echoing through the dark. And every now and then, when I glance at a shadow, I swear I see it move. It wasn't the kind of text you expect to get on a random Tuesday night. Claire, my old college roommate, messaged me out of nowhere. "Hey, weird question. Can you house sit for me? My cat, Shadow, hates being alone, and I'll be in NYC for work. You'd love it here, trust me. Peaceful, quiet, just a week." I hesitated. We hadn't spoken in years. What kind of favor was this? But honestly, I could use a break from my life. Ashburn, Virginia, was a small, picturesque town surrounded by nature. A week of solitude didn't sound so bad. When I arrived, her place was exactly how she described it. Cozy, surrounded by dense pines, with a rustic charm. But something about the air felt heavy, like the forest itself was watching. Shadow, a sleek black cat with piercing yellow eyes, greeted me with a cautious stare, as if he already didn't trust me. "Thanks for doing this," Claire said, shoving a key into my hand. "Shadow's easy. He just glares at you until you feed him. And oh, one thing, make sure all the doors and windows are locked at night." Her tone dropped with that last sentence, like it wasn't just an offhand remark. Okay. Coyotes or something?" I asked with a nervous laugh. "Something like that," she muttered, avoiding my eyes. I brushed it off. The first 2 days were uneventful. Shadow and I developed a rhythm. He ignored me most of the time except when he wanted food. The house creaked a lot, which I chalked up to old wood and the wind. But by the third night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started small. I was reading on the couch when Shadow froze, his fur puffed up like he'd seen a ghost. He stared at the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. I turned to look, expecting a raccoon or maybe a deer. Instead, I saw a man. He was standing at the edge of the forest, barely visible in the faint glow of the moon. He wasn't moving, just watching the house. A chill ran down my spine. My first instinct was to close the curtain, but I couldn't move. Who just stands there in the middle of the night? Eventually, I snapped out of it and yanked the curtain shut. Shadow let out a low growl and bolted under the couch. "Probably just some weirdo passing through," I muttered, though my voice didn't sound convincing even to me. The next morning, I woke up groggy, my nerves still shot from the night before. As I made my way to the kitchen, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The sliding glass door was open. Not wide open, but just enough to make my stomach drop. I knew I'd locked it. My first thought was that I was losing my mind. Then I noticed the footprints. Muddy, human footprints leading from the patio to the inside of the house. Shadow was perched on the counter, his eyes locked on the door, his tail twitching angrily. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. I called Claire. "Someone was in the house last night," I blurted as soon as she picked up. "What?" Her voice was sharp, panicked. "The back door was open this morning and there were footprints. Claire, what the hell is going on here?" There was a long pause. Then she said, "Just lock everything. Don't leave any doors or windows unlocked, okay? Trust me." Trust her? I didn't even know what I was trusting her about. That afternoon, I stepped outside to clear my head. The forest loomed, quiet and still, too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. As I walked along the edge of the yard, I noticed something hanging from the trees. At first, I thought it was trash, but when I got closer, I saw they were dolls. Little stick figures, tied together with red ribbon dangling from the branches like ornaments. Some had crude faces carved into them. Others had symbols I didn't recognize etched into the wood. I felt a wave of nausea and backed away. Who would do something like this? And why? That night I sat in the living room with Shadow curled up beside me, both of us on edge. Around midnight I heard it again, the sound of metal scraping against the back door. I froze. The sound was slow and deliberate, like someone dragging a blade along the glass. Heart pounding, I grabbed the kitchen knife and crept toward the door. My breath caught in my throat when I saw him. The man from the forest. He was standing just outside the glass, his face pressed against it. His features were distorted, his smile too wide, his eyes too dark. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me, his breath fogging up the glass. I backed away slowly, my hands shaking. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I called 911. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. All they found were footprints leading into the forest. The next day, Claire came back early. She took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "I saw him," I said. "The man in the forest. He's not normal, Claire. There's something wrong with him." Her face went pale. She sat down and let out a shaky breath. "I didn't think it would get this bad." "What are you talking about?" I snapped. She hesitated, then said, "This place, the forest. People say it's cursed. There are stories about things that live out there. They watch, and sometimes they follow. I've heard rumors, but I thought they were just that. Rumors." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You knew this and still asked me to come here?" "I didn't think it was real," she shot back, tears in her eyes. "I've lived here for years, and nothing like this has ever happened. I'm so sorry." Her apology didn't make me feel any better. That night, as I packed my things, I glanced out the window one last time. The forest was still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there watching, waiting. I left the next morning. Claire said she was planning to sell the house and move, but I wasn't sure it would matter. Whatever was in that forest wasn't bound to just one place. Even now, weeks later, I still see him in my nightmares. The man with the distorted face and the too wide smile. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I feel like someone's watching me. Sometimes life throws you a lifeline when you least expect it. For me, it came in the form of an older couple, the Harpers, who lived in a picture-perfect historic home in Charleston, South Carolina. They were heading to Italy for a month and needed someone to look after their golden retriever, Max, and keep the house in order. A month of free living in a gorgeous house with a paycheck? I didn't think twice. When I arrived for the walkthrough, Mrs. Harper was as sweet as ever, bustling around to show me the basics. "Max is easy," she said, scratching the dog behind his ears. "Just feed him twice a day, keep him company, and he'll love you forever." Mr. Harper chimed in as we reached the basement door. "This stays locked," he said firmly. "There's nothing down there you need to worry about. Just leave it be." I nodded, not thinking much of it. Basements in old houses were never inviting, and I didn't have any plans to poke around in theirs. With that, they handed me the keys, wished me luck, and left for the airport. The first few days were peaceful. The house was massive, with creaky hardwood floors, high ceilings, and vintage furniture that made it feel like a museum. Max quickly became my shadow, following me from room to room with his wagging tail. Evenings were spent binge-watching shows on their oversized couch, enjoying the kind of tranquility I hadn't felt in years. But as the sun set on my fourth night there, that tranquility began to fade. It started small, barely noticeable at first. That night, as I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, I heard faint tapping. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe branches brushing against the house. But then Max's ears perked up and he let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the hallway leading to the basement door. "Relax, buddy," I said, trying to sound calm. "It's nothing." But Max didn't relax. He stayed planted in the hallway, staring at the basement door like he expected it to open any second. The tapping stopped, and I convinced myself it was just the house settling. Old houses make noises, right? The next morning, though, things got stranger. I found the kitchen stool pulled away from the counter. I distinctly remembered tucking it in the night before. And the back door? It was unlocked. I swore I'd locked it before bed. Trying not to overthink it, I went about my day. But as the evening rolled around, that uneasy feeling returned. The tapping was back, louder this time, and it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the house. The noises continued over the next few nights. Tapping, creaking floorboards, and sometimes the faint sound of something dragging. Max's behavior only made it worse. He refused to go near the basement door, and when I tried to pull him closer, he'd whimper and dig his paws into the floor. On the seventh night, I woke up to a loud thud. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Max was already at the bedroom door, growling low in his throat. The sound had come from the basement. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to stay put. But curiosity, or stupidity, got the better of me. With Max at my heels, I crept down the hall. That's when I saw it. The basement door was open, not just unlocked, but wide open. I froze, a chill running down my spine. Mr. Harper's words echoed in my head. "This stays locked." Grabbing a kitchen knife for reassurance, I approached the stairs. The air was colder here, the kind of damp chill that seemed to seep into your bones. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. There was no response, but I swore I heard faint breathing coming from below. Against my better judgment, I descended the stairs, my flashlight beam bouncing off the stone walls. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, tools, and boxes, but nothing seemed immediately out of place. Still, the air felt heavy, oppressive, like I wasn't alone. Then I noticed it. A small door at the far end of the basement, partially hidden behind a stack of crates. It was slightly ajar, revealing darkness beyond. My stomach churned as I approached. The door creaked loudly when I pushed it open, revealing a narrow tunnel carved into the foundation of the house. The dirt floor was packed down, and the walls were lined with rotting wood beams. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, but the footprints in the dirt told a different story. I followed the tunnel, my heart pounding with every step. At the end was a small makeshift room. There was a mattress on the floor, a pile of blankets, and a lantern. But what caught my attention was the table against the wall. Scattered across it were photos, dozens of them. Photos of the Harpers, photos of the house, and photos of me. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The photos of me weren't old. They'd been taken in the last few days. There was one of me sitting on the couch, one of me feeding Max, even one of me sleeping. Whoever had been living down here had been watching me the entire time. On the floor beneath the table, I found a small notebook. Flipping through it, I found pages of ramblings written in messy, frantic handwriting. They don't know I'm here, they never know. I just need the right moment. The new one is nervous. I like it when they're nervous. I slammed the notebook shut, my hands shaking. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay in the house, but I didn't want to leave whoever this was free to come and go. As I turned to leave, I heard it again, the faint sound of breathing. But this time, it wasn't coming from the tunnel. It was coming from the stairs. I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my hand. At the top of the stairs stood a man, his face pale and gaunt, his clothes filthy and torn. His eyes were wide, almost wild, and his lips curled into a crooked smile. "You found my room," he said, his voice raspy but eerily calm. I couldn't move, couldn't think. He started descending the stairs, one slow step at a time, and I backed up until I hit the wall. Max barked furiously, standing between us, his teeth bared. "Get out of here!" I shouted, raising the flashlight like a weapon. The man stopped, tilting his head like he was studying me. Then, without another word, he turned and bolted up the stairs. I heard the front door slam a moment later. I ran after him, but by the time I reached the porch, he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I locked every door and window in the house, my hands trembling, and called the police. The police arrived within minutes, searching the house and the basement. They found the tunnel, the makeshift room, and the photos, but the man was nowhere to be found. The footprints in the dirt led out to the street where they disappeared. One of the officers pulled me aside. "You're lucky," he said. "This isn't the first time we've had reports like this in the area. A few years back, a man was caught living in someone's attic. Seems like he moved on to basements." When I called the Harpers to tell them what had happened, they were horrified. "We had no idea," Mrs. Harper said, her voice shaking. "We never go down there. If we'd known." They returned from their trip early and promised to install cameras and better locks, but I was done. I packed up my things and left that night, vowing never to house sit again. Weeks passed, but the events of that night haunted me. I couldn't stop seeing his face, hearing his voice. Every creak in my apartment, every shadow out of place, sent me into a panic. Then one morning I found something that made my blood run cold. Taped to my window facing the street was a photo. It was me, sitting on my couch, taken just the night before.